Hispanic and Latino Mental Health Technology Transfer Center was established to develop and maintain a collaborative network to support resource development and dissemination, training and technical assistance, and workforce development for Hispanic Latino populations and communities receiving mental health services throughout the U.S. mainland and the Caribbean. We offer free technical assistance. If you want more information, please contact us. The National Hispanic and Latino MHTTC is under the direction of the Institute for Research, Education and Services in Addiction, IRESA, and housed at the Universidad Central del Caribe School of Medicine in Puerto Rico, and supported by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. As mentioned, the Mental Health TTC network is funded by SAMHSA. SAMHSA strives to reduce the impact of substance use and mental health disorders on U.S. communities throughout its programs and services, and demonstrates that behavioral health is essential to health. Prevention works, treatment is effective, and people recover from mental and substance use disorders. You can learn more about SAMHSA by visiting www.samhsa.gov. And now our moderator.
Hello everyone, bienvenidos a todos. This webinar is our closure for Hispanic Heritage Month for the National Hispanic and Latino Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. Hispanic Heritage Month means a demonstration of how society values the contributions of Hispanic and Latino communities in the USA. The month we celebrate, recognize, and highlight the traditions, culture, and diversity of Hispanic and Latinos or Latinx community. For today's webinar, we have Gabriela Moore. Gabby is originally from Tucson, Arizona, and attended Pima Community College for 3 years before transferring to University of Arizona, earning a bachelor's in communication. Before moving to Denver, she worked in various agencies, but the most impactful agency was Amistades, Inc., where she began her career in substance use prevention. From there, Gabby earned her MSW from University of Denver in Leadership, Administration, and Social Work with Latinx. After her MSW, she worked in child welfare, higher education, and public education. During her 3 years at Denver Public Schools, she created a preventive program to address Latinx risk and protective factors with middle school students. Gabby Moore is a first-year PhD student at the University of Houston, and her research interests are substance use and Latinx, and policy and gentrification. Welcome, Gabby. Also, for today, we have Luis Torres. Luis Torres is an associate professor, director of the Center for Drug and Social Policy Research, and Humana Endowed Chair for the Social Determinants of Health in the Graduate School of Social Work at the University of Houston. His research focuses on co-occurring mental health, substance use, and medical disorders with a particular focusing on Hispanics, African Americans, and other minority communities, and has been funded by SAMHSA, NIDA, and ACF. His ongoing research collaborations include Mexico, El Salvador, and Puerto Rico. A member of the University of Texas Health Initiative and the College of Medicine since their inception, he is the primary liaison between the Graduate College of Social Work and other University of Texas Health Professions programs, and is actively involved in developing interprofessional education, and research initiatives at the university. He serves on several local and national boards, among them the Board of Directors of Avenue 360 Health and Wellness Inc. in Houston, where he currently serves as the board president. Dr. Torres is also on the advisory board of the SAMHSA-funded National Hispanic and Latino Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. Dr. Torres has a doctorate in clinical psychology from Fordham University in New York City and over 30 years of clinical, teaching, administrative, and research experience. Welcome, Dr. Luis Torres and Gabriela.
Okay, before Dr. Torres and Gabriela can speak to us, we're gonna do a couple of questions for everybody. So do you currently serve Hispanic and Latino with any serious emotional disturbance? Yes or no? So we have 81% yes, 20% no. Are you planning to serve Hispanic and Latino populations in the next 6 months? So 93% yes, 7% don't know. What is your current professional role? So we have more or less 31% counselors, 21 social workers, 23% of others, and 17% of faculty, research, or students. And the last one, what type of setting do you currently work in? %36 treatment, 21% university or higher education, 12% government, and 31% others. So I'm now gonna make Dr. Torres and Gabriela presenters, and I'm hoping we can see their screen. So,
thank you, Cindy. Can you hear us and see us?
yes, we can hear you, and we can see you as well.
Are you gonna load the slides, or do you want me to load them?
I think it's better if you guys do it over there.
Okay, so let me see which one it is. Hold on. Let's see. Can you see the slides now?
Not yet. I just see your screen.
Okay, how about now?
No, not yet. Maybe it got extended.
Well, I have 3 monitors. That's part of the challenge. So I don't know which one.
No, we're looking at a Word document right now.
Oh, okay, so good. So I know what I need to do then. Let me close this. The Word document that has the description?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I'm gonna move. I gotcha. All righty. So let me move this screen and then activate it. Ahora sí.
Not yet.
Todavía.
Todavía.
What a mother. Espérate.
There you go. Now I can see it.
You can see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay. In the actual presentation format?
Did you start the slides? Because I just see everything.
Yeah, I started it in the slides are
I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah, just put load them on your end because I'm having some trouble here. It's this one. I'm sorry, everybody. Technology.
Wait. Let me go get. Give me a second.
Technology sometimes gets a little funky. This is the one I'm trying to close. There you go. Closed out of it. We can move this over here. No, it's not working.
Let's see if we can do it from this end. Let's see. Can you see the slides?
No, I don't see them.
Not yet? Okay. Yes. Screen. Okay. How about now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Go to presenters. See if we can show the slideshow. Are you looking at the slide or the presenter's view?
I am looking at the presenter's view. Wonderful. So we can get started. All right, and I can advance it at my end?
No, we'll just go ahead. Just let us know.
Okay, good. So hello, everybody. Thank you. My apologies for the delay. There's always some glitches with technology. Abby, you want to say hello?
Yes. Hi, Gabriela Moore here.
So we're very excited to be spending a little bit of time with you at the close of Hispanic Heritage Month. We wanted to do something a little bit provocative. You know, we like to be provocative sometimes, and I know that during Hispanic Heritage Month, there's a lot of celebration, a lot of activities, a lot of press releases, a lot of good and not so good information that gets put out there, and then things kind of come to a lull. So we thought, let's have a conversation about what happens next. And so we called the webinar, Hispanic Heritage Month is over, now what? And what we wanted to do is really unpack a little bit about who the Latino population is beyond just the overall numbers. And we all know 18% of the population, we know about educational outcomes, we know about a lot of different things, but there is tremendous diversity within the Latino community itself that's really important when it comes to providing health and behavioral health services. Can you go to the next slide? Cindy, oh, there you go. So those are our objectives, looking at the very diverse Latinx community, and we're using the term Latinx purposely. It's a newer term, couple of years in the making. We'll talk about it in a moment some more, but there are also generational differences, language differences, acculturation, geographic differences, racial differences. We'll look at all of those in a minute. Talking a little bit about the challenges that we face when you assume that being Latino is all we need to effectively work with Latino clients, listing strategies to enlist non-Latino providers in our efforts to tackle behavioral health inequities and health inequities. And lastly, a little bit about how do we increase the competency and proficiency of all providers. So if you can go to the next slide, por favor. So talking a little bit about Heritage Month, right? So there's Hispanic Heritage Month. There's, I mean, almost every group in the country has a Heritage Month named after them. And you got to ask yourself, what are these good for, right? So many years ago, I went to a training conference actually in Missouri, in the state of Missouri, called Cambio de Colores, which was meant to highlight the growing Latino population in the state of Missouri. It's still a very low percentage, but growing. And at one of the workshops, a young lady stood up and she said that she was tired of these heritage months, and she was tired of cultural competency being reduced to the 3 Fs. And I thought she was going to curse, but instead what she said was fun, food, and festival. So we hear a lot about fun, food, and festival when it comes to heritage months, and that's important. But there are many reasons why these heritage months are important. One of them is checking the box, right? So agencies that receive state funding, federal funding, are required to have all of their staff trained in cultural competency, or whatever the term of the month is. And these heritage months are a good opportunity to check that box. There's always place to increase awareness of the diversity among us, and that happens a lot during heritage months, and that's a good thing as well. It's important to celebrate diversity. It's not just knowing about it, but celebrating it and embracing it. Of course, heritage months are good to learn about diverse groups. So we do learn about the festivals that different groups celebrate, in this case, Latinos and Hispanics, the foods that we eat, and how we like to have fun. It's also a phenomenal opportunity to disseminate factual information. A lot of the information that non-minorities get about minority groups, in this case, non-Latinos about Latinos, is gotten through the movies, through radio, through sources that are not that factual. And frankly, there's a lot of misconception out there about who Latinos, Latinas are, what they believe, what they value, even what language they speak. So we're going to be unpacking that a little bit. So disseminating factual information is a great way to use the showcase of a heritage month like Hispanic Heritage Month. It's also a great opportunity to highlight the challenges that are faced by the populations, and issuing a call to action on how to actually tackle some of these problems. Cindy, can you move to the next one? Oops, did you break it?
Yeah.
There you go, no lo rompas. Thank you. So where we often fall short, though, is that at the end of the, by tomorrow, Hispanic Heritage Month is over and we move on to something else, right? So we have to acknowledge that our curiosity about others, about the clients that we work with, the people that we live with, and wanting to learn more about them, particularly those that are different from us, can't be limited to a Heritage Month. That it has to be a continuous exercise of engaging with each other and learning about each other. And the second really problematic point, which is the one that we really wanted to tackle with today's webinar, is that it's easy to put people in boxes. And during Heritage Month, one of the things that we do is that we put all Latinos, all Hispanics into this one box. And it's important to recognize that there's tremendous diversity within diversity, as we're going to see in the next couple of slides. Cindy, la próxima, por favor. So how diverse is the Latinx community? So Gabby and I started brainstorming about what we wanted to present in the webinar, and we came up with these areas where Latinos are different, and these are just a few of many. The list is not meant to be all inclusive, but we look at country of origin, the terminology that's used to refer to the population, generational differences, language differences, acculturation differences, where they live in the United States. It creates differences. There are differences with regards to race. If you've ever administered a survey and asked a bunch of Latinos what race they belong to, you're likely to get 20 different answers. And of course, educational differences as well. So let's look quickly at each one of these. So country of origin is one one big difference. So Latinos come from 19 different countries in Latin America, from Puerto Rico, from right here in the United States. You know, we have many Latinos that have been here for generations after generations, and they say, you know, we didn't cross the border crossed us. And then there's some debate about whether people who come from Brazil and Spain are Latinos as well, right? So a lot of Brazilians that I know and that you know will say that they're not Hispanic, but they're Latino. A lot of people from Spain will say, no, I'm Spanish or Spaniard, but some of them will say, you know, they're Latino or Hispanic as well. So we come from many different places. All of these countries are different. They have different history, socio-political histories. They have different social class distributions. They have varied racial, ethnic, and language backgrounds, and many different cultures within each of these countries. So to think that a group of people that comes from all of this is a homogeneous group is really an exercise in folly. So just for starters, when you look at where we come from, it tells you that the diversity is immense. We go to the next slide, please, Cindy. So just here to summarize, here are just some of the stats that you all know. These are the 10 largest Latino subgroups, you know, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Dominicans, Central Americans, and South Americans, and then other all grouped together. We're about 18% of the population right now. When you look at US versus foreign born, almost 2/3, 65% are US born, which means that they are US citizens, and 35% are foreign born. And the majority of them are or either citizens or legal residents as well. The median age is 27. It's actually been 27 for a while. The latest statistics that we saw just yesterday, it went up to 28, so it went up by 1 year. And the projections are that we're going to continue to grow. The largest group, of course, is Mexican Americans, and that's something that makes sense when you consider geographically. Lots of territory in this country was once Mexico. The proximity, you know, we share one of the longest borders, if not the longest border in the world, with Mexico, and then the ease of travel over the years between the two countries. So country of origin is a huge area of difference. So let's look at terminology. I mean, these are just some of the terms that over the years historically have been either self-appropriated, self-ascribed to Latinos or Hispanics, or applied by others. So raza and chicanos are two historic terms. These are some of the earliest terms used, and these are terms that had kind of a political connotation, a connotation of struggle. The federal government came up with the term Hispanic to be able to count in the census all people that come from a Spanish-speaking country. The term Latino was reactionary, I think, in many circles to the term Hispanic. The new term that's in vogue in recent years is this term Latinx, which was originally meant to move away from the gender binary, male and female, but it has really evolved to become a more inclusive term that a lot of people, particularly young people, are really taking to. Our Hispanic Student Association, for example, here in the Graduate College of Social Work, of which Gabby is a member, just changed its name officially to the Latinx Student Association. Then you have the hyphenation, which we typically see it with Mexican Americans. Sometimes we see Salvadoran Americans or other types of hyphenations, but the typical one that we see is Mexican American. And then we see that the majority of people, and this is something that the Pew Research Center has found repeatedly, that a majority of Latinos first identify by their country of origin, and secondly, they will identify by some pan-ethnic term. So people might say, I'm Salvadoran first, or I'm Puerto Rican first, and only second would they say, oh, I'm Hispanic, or I'm Latino, or I'm Latinx, or whatever the pan-ethnic term is. There are also, if you can just go back for 1 second to the terms. So there are also geographic and differences and even disciplinary differences in the use of various terms. So when I was in graduate school in the 80s and 90s, I was in the East Coast, and a lot of the East Coast people use the term Hispanic, whereas a lot of the West Coast people use Latino. When you look when you look at research, for example, in the social sciences, which is the literature that I consume the most, historically in 70s, 80s, 90s, oops, the screen went dead. There you go. You see the term Hispanic a lot. You still see it, although it's now starting to change. But when you look at the humanities literature, or when you look at the arts literature, you tend to see more the term Latino. So these terms are all often used interchangeably, but there are differences between them. And the term that a particular individual or group of individuals chooses to describe themselves has meaning. And we need to try to figure out, not define people ourselves, but how do they define themselves, and ask them what the meaning is behind that definition. You can go to the next one, please. Generational differences are another one. So we have, first generation, which is the immigrant generation. That's the first to come to this country. And we have a large number of Latinos in this country that are first generation immigrants. By following the discourse in the media, you would think that they all, came over the wall yesterday or across the border yesterday. But we have immigrant generation members who have been here for a very, very long time. Many of them have become naturalized citizens or legal permanent residents, but they still are first generation immigrants because they were the first to come to this country, right? And this is the generation, particularly more recent immigrants, that tends to speak primarily Spanish. We tend to think of Hispanic and Spanish speaking as synonymous. You hear the word Hispanic, Latino, whichever term you use, and automatically you think Spanish speaking. And the truth is that over 2/3 of Latinos speak very little Spanish at all, right? So this first or immigrant generation is the one where you're more likely to find Spanish speaking, primarily Spanish speaking individuals. Then you have your second generation, which is the first generation to be born in the United States from parents who immigrated. And in this second generation, what you used to have, that's beginning to change, thankfully, but what you used to have is that the immigrant generation would really push them to become American at whatever cost, whatever that means, right? So don't even speak Spanish, don't learn your language of heritage, just speak English, many folks from this second generation take on more American names, for example, or they date people that are not Hispanic, for example, and so they were invested for many years in just becoming American, right, and not being singled out as being Latino. And then typically what happened is those that got to college, took a class on ethnic studies, Puerto Rican studies, Mexican American studies, and then experienced kind of a reawakening and a desire to connect with their culture of origin. We're thankfully are living in this era, or we're living for a while. I think it's on hiatus right now because of everything that's going on in the national scene. But people feeling like they could be American and be from another culture as well, and embracing both of them. And I hope we'll get back to that at some point. Then you have your third generation, which is born in the U.S. of parents who are born in the U.S. And in this third generation, oftentimes you see a complete loss of the language and a complete moving away of the cultural heritage that the immigrant generation brought with them. These folks no longer live in ethnic enclaves. They live in the mainstream. That there's a lot of intermarriage in the third generation. If they do speak Spanish, it's by choice. They decided that they wanted to learn it. So there are significant differences. And then, as I mentioned in an earlier slide, and Gabby and her family are one of these families, are the people that have been here so long that they will say, we did not cross the border crossed us. Can you go to the next one? We have differences in language. I was just talking a moment ago about how this obsession that we have that Hispanic automatically means Spanish speaking, but there's a range of diverse language proficiencies among Hispanics. We do have monolingual Spanish-speaking Hispanics or Latinos or Latinx. These tend to be the first generation immigrant generation, typically the more recent ones. Those that have been here for a long time, that are immigrants, they do learn English. They still prefer to transact in their language of origin, right? So particularly if they still live in an ethnic enclave where they can do almost everything in Spanish, they really don't have a need to use much English. That doesn't mean they don't speak it, right? Se defienden is what we say here in the barrio, right? You know, they can hold their own. But they remain primarily Spanish speakers. Then you have people who are bilingual. I mean, that as you start to move forward, both in time in the U.S. and generationally, you're people who are bilingual Spanish-English. I mean, they can transact in both languages, but they have a preference for transacting in Spanish. That's the language that they tend to think in and transact in. And then along that continuum, you have your bilingual English-Spanish. These are people who are English dominant, but they are Spanish-speaking as well. And then you have your monolingual English-speaking Latinos, these that speak very little or no Spanish at all. And increasingly, you know, you have a lot of Latinos who speak 3 or more languages, right? They speak English and Spanish, and they go and they study, you know, French or Italian, Portuguese, German, other languages. My daughter wants to learn Welsh. I can't understand why for the life of me, but she wants to learn Welsh. She doesn't want to learn Spanish. She wants to learn Welsh, but she's in Spanish. So language is another one. If we look at the next slide, you know, you have this, again, this, I'm trying to dispel this myth that many people have that Latino means Spanish speaking. If you look here, this is from the Pew Research Center from 1980 to 2015. You know, the percentage of Latinos or Hispanic ages 5 and older who speak only English at home or who speak English at least very well, right? There's a question that has several categories, and you know, it's always been high when you look across, but when you look at 2015, 90% of US born Hispanics and 35% of foreign born Hispanics all speak only English at home, or they say that they speak English at least very well, right? And across all Hispanics, it's 69%. So if I can do, if we can achieve anything from this webinar, we would like it to be to kind of divorce the idea in the minds of providers and people in general that being Latino means speaking Spanish. So, you know, certainly many of us do, but not all of us do. Another area, if we can go to the next one, another area of diversity among the Hispanics is acculturation, right? And this is related to foreign born versus US born, and it's also related to the number of years that you've been in the United States, although we have people who have been here for many years and still have low levels of acculturation to the US society. But typically, immigrants, particularly more recent immigrants, are going to have very low levels of acculturation. And just like with language, you move along that continuum to people who are more bicultural, and you can be bicultural but more from your country of origin than from the US, or bicultural more from the US than from your country of origin. There's the balance of values and beliefs and behavioral practices and allegiances and even the language, and when you think it just varies across this bicultural spectrum. Biculturality is a spectrum in and of itself. And then you have folks who are highly acculturated, so they really are part of the mainstream society in many different ways, but they still have some practices, some beliefs, some behaviors that come from the country of origin. And then at the end of that spectrum, you have people who are completely assimilated. And there have been a lot of research studies that have been done on the relationship between acculturation and health outcomes. And you know, we go back and forth on this research. By and large, one of the things that happens, that we know happens, is that as people acculturate, they lose some of the protective factors that they bring with them, and they start to acquire some of the risk factors. And when you look at generationally, or years in the US, or native versus foreign born, you typically have worsening outcomes as acculturation continues. We still don't really understand why it happens. You know, that's part of the challenge the type of studies that we design. But something to pay attention to in terms of health and behavioral health outcomes is the acculturation level. That continues to be an important variable to look at. Another area of diversity is geographic location. If you can go to the next one. So I'm assuming there are people on the webinar from different parts of the country, and you know that there are differences between West Coast Latinos, East Coast Latinos, Latinos in the Midwest, you know, border communities. A lot of these differences are changing because Latinos are very mobile, and you see a lot of mobility. But when you think back to, I mean, 20, 30 years ago, you thought about the East Coast, and then you thought about Puerto Ricans, for example, along the Northeast Corridor, some Dominican pockets in New York, and then in Massachusetts, and then down in Florida and Miami, Cubans. Well, that's changed drastically, right? And now you have, for example, large numbers of Dominicans who have moved down to the Carolinas and to Georgia. You know, you have communities in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, where in the matter of a few years, the number of Latinos, particularly of Dominican background, has just exploded. And then when you go to the West Coast, it was typically, you know, Mexicans, Mexican Americans, but now you see a lot of Salvadorans in Los Angeles, for example. The three largest communities of Salvadorans in the U.S. are actually L.A., the Washington, Virginia, Maryland area, and of course Houston, right? In the Midwest, you also used to see a lot, in Chicago, for example, long-standing Puerto Rican enclaves, and that's changing radically. If those of you that might be in New York, if you go to El Barrio, the area around 116th, you know, that used to be almost 100% Puerto Rican, and now it's shifted completely, and it's a large Mexican community. So there's a lot of movement. You can no longer make the assumption about who lives in the West Coast, who lives in the East Coast, who's in the Midwest. But historically, there have been pockets there that might still be there. So, and there might be some important differences there. And of course, border communities are a very special group in and of itself, because they literally live in two worlds, and oftentimes literally with one foot on each country, right? They have family across the border, on both sides of the border. They may work or go to school on one side or the other. There's the next slide is just kind of a map of where the 10 largest Latino groups are. So if you can just show it quickly, Cindy. The map with the green. The next slide. So those are where the top 10 states displaying the largest Hispanic Latino population are. That shouldn't surprise us at all. I mean, we look at, you know, 1 is California, 6 is Arizona, 9 New Mexico, 2 Texas. That's the border, right? That's the border. And then 8 is Colorado. Most of that used to be Mexico. And then, of course, you have Florida, you have Chicago over there, and then you have New York and New Jersey at the top. That's where the largest number of Latinos are concentrated. If you go to the next one, another area of diversity, and we don't talk about this much among Latinos because we like to say that we're kind of race blind, but that's really not true. And when you look at the census definition for Hispanics, Hispanics can be of any race. And so, and some Hispanics do identify both as Hispanic and as a member of a particular race, right? So you have white Hispanics, Black Hispanics, Asian Hispanics. You have a lot of Hispanics that come from native or indigenous backgrounds in Mexico and Guatemala, for example. You have multiracial Hispanics, especially as intermarriage continues to grow. And then you have Hispanics that will not identify with any race. I mean, and not because they don't know the difference between race and ethnicity, but just because they refuse to identify in racial terms, and they will just say, I'm Latino, I'm Mexican, I'm Salvadoran, I'm Puerto Rican, whatever the case might be. So race is a construct that we rarely explore when we are doing assessments, because, you know, we do our demographics, and whether it's in a clinic setting or in a research setting, and, you know, we typically separate the two of them, you know, which racial group best describes you, and then a separate question, are you Hispanic or Latino? And we leave it at that. But there might be important connotations to how a client in behavioral health treatment identifies racially, and this is an area for exploration. And then lastly, in terms of diversity, if you go to the last one, another area of great diversity is education, right? Which is slide 16, if you can move to it, Cindy. So there are differences in education by groups, and when you look at this slide, this is data from 2016. You look at the educational achievements, so the percentage of adults age 25 and older that have a bachelor's degree or higher by selected Hispanic subgroups, it ranges from a low of 9% for those that are from Guatemala or their heritage is traced to Guatemala, and El Salvador is the other one, to a high of 55 for those from Venezuela. Right? And then of course the largest groups are at the top. If across the board, about 15% of Latinos 25 and older have a bachelor's or higher, but Cubans are 27%, Dominican 18%, etc. So it's not across the board. So you see great variation, and that has to do with historical reasons, socio-political reasons, opportunities, etc. So this is also important to unpack when we're working with a Latino client. Not all of them are going to have a low level of education, but of course not all of them are going to have high levels of education in their country of origin either. So that's in terms of diversity. So let's shift gears quickly. I'm being mindful of the time. I know we started a little late. You want to jump in here, or you want to wait to get to your?
Yeah, wait.
Okay, so there are across the board issues that impact all Latinx communities, and we quickly wanted to touch on some of them. We talk a lot about health disparities. We want to move more away from the term disparity, really talk about health inequity, because it's not sufficient to say that a disparity exists. Disparity means a difference between two groups when you account for everything else. What's at the basis of that disparity is an inequity in something, right? So, for example, we know that Latinos or Hispanics are about 50% more likely to die from diabetes, which is a highly treatable condition, or from liver disease than whites. 68% of Latinos have poorly controlled hypertension versus 54% of non-Hispanic whites. Now, Latinos as a group have less hypertension than whites, but more likely to have it poorly controlled. Access to healthcare, insurance, all the things that you know happen. Latinos are 23% more likely to be obese, 28% less likely to have colorectal screening, and even in health, you see differences between groups. For example, even though Latinos as a group have lower rates of smoking, Puerto Rican males and Cuban males have higher rates of smoking than whites, 26 and 22% versus 24%. We go to the next slide. I'm moving quickly. I'm just trying to highlight some of these disparities. It's the differences in the 10 leading causes of death for non-Hispanic whites versus Hispanics, and you see 5 and 6 highlighted there: diabetes and chronic liver disease and cirrhosis for Hispanics. So we need to screen about these things. We need to do it early. We need to make sure that people have adequate treatment. And we go quickly to the next slide. You know, we would be remiss not to talk about HIV, because today is National Hispanic Latino HIV Awareness Day, but that's another area where we continue to have health disparities. So a quarter of all HIV infection cases are Latinos. Latino males are 3 times more likely than non-Hispanic white males to either have HIV or AIDS, and twice as likely to die of HIV infection. Latino females are 4 times more likely than non-Hispanic white females to have HIV or AIDS, and 3 times more likely to die of HIV infection. And then when you see the case rates for 100,000 in the population for 2016, you see a great disparity there, 38.8 versus 10.6 for Latino and white males, 5.3 and 1.7 for Latino and white females, and then 17 versus 5.2 for Latinos as a whole. So this continues to be an area of inequity that we have to do something about in our places of work. I'm going to turn it over to Gabi, who is going to talk a little bit about the next topic.
So with what happened last week at one of the town halls and talking about trans women and trans men of color, I was inspired to add this piece to closing out Hispanic Heritage Month and talking about the intersection of our LGBTQIA and Latinx communities. So really, what are the three most pressing issues in this climate right now? And this is coming from GLAAD and the Human Rights Campaign. So, you know, they highlighted immigration, substance use, violence, and harassment. Let's look at the next slide. So here is some current statistics right now that is impacting our Latino community within the LGBT community. So if you can see here, we have about 904,000 LGBT adult immigrants, 30% which are undocumented, which matches what we're seeing with our immigrants in the United States as a whole. About 28% are undocumented. This data is from 2013. Now, what is the issue that our communities are facing in today's political climate? We have a lot of attention on the border, right? And so if you see these numbers down here from the Human Rights Campaign, 40% of trans people held in state and federal detention centers report being sexually abused. And LGBTQ people are 97 times more likely to be reported being sexually abused in immigration detention. To me, you know, as a social worker, this is alarming data. This is scary. We do understand that some of our, you know, trans immigrants and our LGBT immigrants come seeking asylum because of what they'll face in their home country. And so yet we put them in more harm's way in these scenarios, right? And so what can we do now that we understand what is this looking like? I would be amiss to not mention substance use with this community. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, that's what the LGB is for. Latino adults are more likely to abuse alcohol than their non-Latino LGB counterparts. Now with the youth, it's really interesting. This was looking at LGBT Latino youth in comparison with Latino youth non-LGBT, and it showed that the LGBT Latino youth are twice as likely as their counterparts to experiment with alcohol and other drugs. When we're looking at adults from 2015, adults that's defined as sexual minority, and this was just limited to lesbian, gay, and bisexual, they were more than twice as likely to have used any illicit drug in the past year. And then the next slide, which looks at violence and harassment, right? Like, what are our LGBTQIA Latinx brothers and sisters facing for violence and harassment? So we see that of the hate crimes reported, 15% of the homicide victims were Latinx from 2014. More recent data, we're seeing that hate violence survivors, 20.6% of those are Latino. Intimate partner violence survivors, 27.2% of those are Latinx. And again, they were lumped as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. Again, looking at the youth, LGBT Latinx youth are twice as likely as their non-LGBT Latino counterparts to be, and I quote, excluded by peers, verbally harassed, physically assaulted at school. That Human Rights Campaign report from 2012 really sheds light on what our LGBT Latino youth experience compared to non-LGBT Latino youth. And so I can send that. I really invite you to check that out if you know this is a population you work with or want to work with or understand deeper. So we're going to kind of switch gears and look at Latinos in different helping professions. So if you look on this chart here, you see that the majority of Latinos in the industry are working in construction. And then at the bottom right, we see education and health services being, you know, just a little over 10%.
11.5.
So if we're the fastest growing minority group in the United States, yet we're not really being represented in the helping profession. And then if we could look at the next slide.
The next one, which is actually in disciplines.
So this is breaking down the actual helping professions. And so again, you can see that the majority, again, it's like farming, forestry, but again, at the bottom, it's healthcare practitioners, technical, legal, right, education, and social services amongst those.
And healthcare practitioners, which is where most of our audience would fall in, is only about 7.5%, right? So
yeah, 7.5%.
So the take home message there is that we're never going to have enough Latinos providers to treat Latinos, so we have to think of other strategies.
We can go to the next slide. So this was kind of exciting. I collaborated with my mom, who's a registered nurse. She got her degrees later in life, but so she, you know, we see here that 11% of social workers are Latino, but it breaks down to 12.6 don't have a social work degree, whereas 9.5% have an MSW. I could not find the data for LCSW. I apologize for that. So then that means we're missing the data, right? 5% of psychologists are Latino, 9.3% of psychiatrists are Latino. And then with nurses, I found that really interesting. My mom and I had a really deep conversation because she doesn't speak Spanish. And so she always felt like, oh, well, I don't speak Spanish, but she had one of the highest rates of best service provided in her hospital because she related to the population in Tucson because she was from the community. 3% of nurse practitioners are Latino. And again, our community keeps growing, but we don't see the number being represented in the professions.
Next slide, please, Cindy. So what does it all mean? So we you know, I said, trying to bring it to a close. One size doesn't fit all. So we wanted, one of the things that we wanted to really make the point with this webinar is that Latinos as a group are incredibly diverse. And of course, everybody on this webinar knows that, but we wanted to really show that diversity, and hopefully we've accomplished that. And so being so diverse, you know, we got to stop thinking that one pill, one size fits everything. Obviously, there are areas of commonality among all Latino subgroups, but the differences matter, especially when it comes to treatment or service provision. And all too often we make assumptions about the services that we're going to offer Latinos with a lens that all of them are the same. You can go to the next one, Cindy. As we were seeing the slides, we wanted to show you the slides about Latino representation in various helping professions, because we wanted to make the case that we're never going to have enough Latinx providers to treat the entire Latinx community. You know that, yes, the Latino population is still one of the fastest growing. I think the Asian community is now growing a little bit faster than the Latino population, but we're still growing pretty fast, continue to go pretty fast. But the growth of Latinos within particular disciplines, particularly the helping professions, is far slower than the growth of Latinos in the overall population. So we have a challenge with not having enough Latino providers. The next slide, please. So, and by the way, not that matching should be the goal. A lot of times we think that ethnic or racial matching between the client and the provider is the best thing. And there is some research out there that suggests that that isn't always the best thing, and that there are other factors that are more important, right? Particularly in helping relationships, a therapeutic alliance, empathy, building goals together and collaborating to achieve those goals, positive regard and affirmation, mastery over the skill set that the provider is displaying, being seen as congruent and genuine by the client, and being able to see the problem and see the solution together. This is literature that's more about the psychotherapeutic relationship, but I think these common factors apply to any type of working relationship between a provider and a client. The next slide, please. And so what it all means is that we need to continue to recruit and train both Latino and non-Latino providers on how to work effectively with the Latino community. And this is another really important point. You know, the next time, if you are Latino or Latina, you in the audience, the next time you sign up to go to a training on working with Latinos or cultural competency or whatever it is, you know, make it a point of recruiting 2 or 3 of your non-Latino coworkers and bringing them with you. We had a Latino Health Summit here in Houston a couple of weeks ago, back on September 19th. It was incredibly well attended. We had over 150 people there. But as you interacted with the participants and moved around and looked at names and just talked with people, but 80% of the participants were Latino already, and that is important, right? But we want to bring the non-Latinos in to also receive these types of trainings. Next slide, please. So just to close, this is the last slide. You know, what does it take to work with the Latino community? Well, you don't have to be Hispanic or Latino, right? Sometimes it helps, and sometimes it might actually get in the way. And in fact, I know that the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center has an upcoming webinar that it's about this topic precisely. You don't have to speak Spanish. You know, as I said, one of the take-home messages, if we can achieve anything, is to help divorce in the minds of people that being Hispanic automatically means speaking Spanish. This also creates a lot of shame and embarrassment in Latinos who are proud to be Latinos but who don't speak Spanish. You do have to be skilled. You have to be well trained in your particular discipline, and you have to have a blend of these important common factors. You do have to be open to learning from your clients. And you know, today we're calling this cultural humility. Who knows what we'll call it tomorrow, right? We change this term all the time, and it's as it should be, because the concept is continuing to evolve, and we have to recognize that you do need additional continuous training, even if you are Latino, right? So being Latino is not enough to work effectively with a Latino client. You also need skills. You know, when you attend to the diversity that we just highlighted, you need to recognize that not all Latinos, if you are Latino, are going to be like you. But at the end of the day, we finally have to recognize that culture is fluid and that culture changes all the time. We'll leave it there, and I think we may have time for a couple of questions. Cindy and Dr. Isa, back to you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. It was such a wonderful and informative presentation. Before we get to the questions and answers section, I would like to remind you all that at the end of this presentation, you will be receiving a link for completing a survey. This is of most importance in order for us to continue delivering educational webinars like this. Please complete this survey, and that will take about 2 minutes, and you will be supporting our work. Also, you will receive a certificate of participation.
Okay, so we have one comment, and I think this was brought up when you, Dr. Torres, were talking about the different languages. And someone said that also we have Latinx that speak dialects.
Indigenous languages.
Yeah. And then we have our first question says, how can clinicians measure or assess acculturation levels?
Well, that's actually a fantastic question, right? So I mean, there are wonderful scales out there that attempt to capture acculturation, but we don't have time to administer acculturation scales in a clinical setting. So oftentimes we rely on proxy measures, and some of these proxy measures are pretty good. I mean, language is one of them, for example, right? So somebody who is primarily Spanish speaking is probably going to have a much lower level of acculturation than somebody who's primarily English speaking. You know, the nativity is an important one, US versus foreign born, particularly when you look at it together with language and with the number of years in the US, right? But the best way to assess it is to, you know, to just have conversations with people and listen. What are the people that you normally hang out with? You know, who are your friends? You know, what are the movies that you see? What are the books that you read? What language do you watch television in, right? So what are the things that you believe, right? Are you more family oriented and gregarious and communal, and the needs of the many are more important than the needs of the one? Or are you more kind of on the spectrum of independent? What I want matters more than my family, for example, right? So, or my community. So the best way to assess it in a clinical setting is informally engaging in conversations with your client that can give you a sense of where your client is on that acculturation spectrum. Want to add something to that, Gabby?
Also, I think you could do a culturegram, kind of like a genogram, but looking at the cultural history and then understanding that generational piece, right? I mean, in my family's case, we've been in Tucson since it was Mexico. However, you know, back in the day, it was still more treated like Mexico versus now. So then you could understand what are some of the situations that your family has been put in that have maybe forced you to have to assimilate or acculturate, right? Like discrimination.
Okay,
That was a
awesome.
great question.
Yeah. And then the next one says, is there a shift back to being primarily Spanish speaking in the home for children under 5?
Is there a shift back to being primarily? That is actually another great question. I don't know in terms of data, national data, but I can tell you that anecdotally, many of my Spanish-speaking Latino clients or bilingual, not clients, colleagues, Latino colleagues, particularly those that are more kind of have higher levels of formal education or are in mixed marriages, for example, are making a conscious decision to speak Spanish at home all the time to their young kids, so that the kids can learn the language, they can get used to speaking it, right? So I would say that anecdotally, yes, there is a shift back, not just Spanish, but in other groups as well that are minority groups who come from countries that speak languages other than English. That desire to give them that as a present, right? Language is a powerful way. It's one of the ways in which we communicate heritage. So making sure that young children grow up listening to the language of origin and relating to it and hopefully learning how to speak it is important. I mean, we know that identity is an important protective factor in youth. So I would venture to say that if there is data out there, or when there is data out there, it'll probably show that, yes, there does seem to be a shift in that direction.
Yeah, I would agree. Totally.
Now I want to go and look and see if there's data about that. I'm going to look into that.
Good. Okay, before the last question, somebody asked about the PowerPoint slides. I want to tell everybody that on your menu here on the GoToWebinar app, you can go to the little part where it says handout. You should have 1 of 5, and then you can download the slides there. Just the info there for everybody. Okay, so our last question.
And if they can't download it, you can email Gabriela or myself, and we're happy to send them to you. Our emails are on the screen.
There you go. Or you can also email us. Okay, last one. Are you aware of any free interpretation services that can translate? As a school social worker, families are not always of the school-based lingo we often use. So, for example, for social history, special education, and stuff like that. Are there any free interpretation services that can translate?
You work in
school. That's a great question. I just finished working in Denver, Colorado. So Denver Public Schools had free interpretation services, but I feel, and the person who's asking this question, if you're in DPS, I don't know what happened, but I just, like in Arizona, it's totally up to the district. And so I don't know of anything that's quote unquote free. Can I ask what school district it is?
Let's see.
Well, you look for that though.
Yeah. Junkers.
In New York, right? So, I mean, you would think so, right? I mean, sometimes we just have to ask the question in the system or look at the policies and the laws. There's a lot of places where in healthcare and in education, you're required to offer language interpretation services, but we don't know to ask. So I don't know of any off the top of my head. I would guess that it's going to vary by place, depending on the politics of the place. But look at the policies and look at the laws, and if the laws and wherever you practice require providers to provide interpretation, and in a lot of places educational and healthcare providers are required, then advocate for it, right? We don't just work with individuals, we have to advocate for the communities as well.
I want to add to that, you know, a couple years ago in Arizona, it was on the ballot to get rid of Spanish in health and human services. So again, just, you know, knowing the political climate of your systems that impact the Latinx community, I think it's really important to advocate for the services if you're supposed to get them, or if they're trying to get rid of it for whatever political reason, advocating to keep them.
Yeah, become politically engaged.
Yeah, somebody else also helped with the answer. It says in New York, we do have interpreting services via PNW buses in Yorktown Heights, Upper Westchester County. So maybe that's more helpful as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah.
Any more questions? We want to thank you again for your awesome presentation, and thanks everybody who's been here. And I think that's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Gracias.